All right, we are live.
Hello,
Um,
hello, Mercuranians.
let's just get this link sent out and then we will get started. Um,
Awesome.
all
Well,
right.
hello, Mercuranians. Thank you for joining us, whether live or in spirit through the recording. Um, we are going to be picking back up with Rhetorius today, houses 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, it's been a little bit since we've had an episode, but we are glad to be back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is gonna be, I think, a really smooth, pretty straightforward episode, at least. We're just back in the houses again. And yeah, also, um, I think we both realized that this set of like chapters from Rhetorius are a little bit more straightforward, and kind of consistent and like makes sense with what we know about the houses and everything else we know about how Rhetorius approaches like astrology and using decans and things like this. So it's all pretty solid. Yeah, I'm excited to chat it though.
Yeah, totally. And happy Venus Day also, just saying
Hmm.
that.
Yes.
I feel like some of the simplicity with this set, with this angular triad, it comes from the fact that none of them are dark houses. They all
Mm-hmm.
aspect the ascendant. And while the third house is cadent, it's not a bad house at all. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to maybe talk about that a little bit because the third house like straddles that line between being like basically almost the next worst at before 2 and 8. Um, and like I guess like well, what else should go there really? Because all the other ones are a little bit nicer in terms of either being higher in the sky or having a trine to like for instance 9 has the trine to the ascendant instead of the sextile for the third. So like I guess I get like why it would be like right before the four dark houses like 2, 8, 6, 12, but like it's such a good house though. Like I don't know, I feel like they should we and I don't know, they've been tiered before, but I feel like it's a really solid house. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like in terms of topic, like I agree 100%. Like there's a lot of good things that can come from this house. But in terms of activity and dynamism, I think that's where the third house kind of gets its flack. And like well, Rhetorius says mentions travel a lot while
Mm.
in this section. And like we've talked about this before, but travel is not the most productive thing, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, should we just dive right into the third house then, since we're here?
Yeah, did you send out the Twitter link
Yes, I just retweeted it myself.
on the Mercuranians?
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay, okay, I see it. It's there now. All right. So do you want to start us off with the first paragraph of the third?
sure. Um, all right, so the third house. The third house is called the house of the moon goddess, overshadowed, authoritative, and metacosmic. It signifies the topic of foreign things and that of dreams and religious observance, and banking and friends and brothers and the queen. And so that's our little intro that Rhetorius gives us here. And, there's some usual stuff we know about in the third house there, like with friends or brothers. Um, but also there's this really great perspective on how the moon's joy here offers so many other powerful interpretations that really haven't been a part of the tradition for a long time. And so, of course, it's called the Moon Goddess. And, that title in itself is very reminiscent of the subtle and yet spiritual influence the moon has over the affairs of the third house that are kind of the regular routine things we do, but applied in that spiritual context of things like ritual observances or going to temples or, being a dream augur. It's like this is where actually the third house brings in a lot more of those significations.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Something that I do think is interesting in this first little bit here is the
Hmm.
use of the word overshadowed. That could
Hmm.
mean it's a little ambiguous, but I do think it's relevant because this is the place where the moon rejoices, and that is something that's super powerful and really, really important. And
Hmm.
I feel like oftentimes that does blatantly get overshadowed, right? You're busy talking about siblings or friends or short travel, but you forget to mention that the queen belongs here, right? The
Yeah.
moon rejoices here.
Hmm.
Yeah, worth mentioning. And I like that Rhetorius brings that up like right away, even if that's not like totally what he meant, it has relevant context today.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And even if it's not necessarily that and it's still just talking about like this shadowy influence, I think that also makes sense as well. Like this idea that, it's like this dark gateway into foreign places, unknown places. It's not a dark house in the sense that it's not aspecting the ascendant, but it's still a gateway into, yeah, areas of exploration, physically, like traveling, or spiritually, and that's where again we come back to this idea of conversing with the gods and divining the future that's like showing up all the time here when we have like moon mercury going on, or venus or something.
Mhm.
So yeah, do you want to go ahead with the next paragraph on planets there?
Yeah. So, page 62 here, by the way, for anybody listening. Oh, yeah, also, shout out to the
Mm,
AFA for letting us study Rhetorius and share our
mhm.
studies with y'all.
Yeah.
Um, Really, really generous of them to let us do that. Feel free to purchase any AFA prints online at their store in somewhere in Arizona that's not Phoenix. Why can I not remember it right now? Flagstaff.
Yeah.
Flagstaff, yes. Flagstaff, Arizona. Check out the AFA website
Yeah.
and Twitter, all of the above.
Yeah.
Um, Back to the text. So Rhetorius continues. I'm going to omit some little things from here, but not too much. If the moon then chances to be in the third, having rulership of the ascendant or the lot of fortune, especially in her own face and of the sect and full, and adding to her numbers, the native will be great, rich, one who gives advice from the gods, and he will have various moneys from sacred places, and he will rule cities. So I just want to comment on this. Treat this like a checklist, not like
Mhm.
if you have all of these things, this is what'll happen. Because if the moon chances to be in the third, ruling the ascendant or the lot of fortune. So if the moon is ruling the ascendant or lot of fortune by domicile, right? And the moon is in the third, the moon is going to be in Virgo. That
Mhm.
third thing, especially in her own face, the moon doesn't have a face in Virgo. So
Mhm.
those first three items on that list are already incongruent.
Mhm.
So treat this like a tally, right? Like, is the moon, so if the moon is in the third place from the lot of fortune or the ascendant, start
Mhm.
there. Does the moon rule the lot of fortune or the ascendant? Is the moon in her own face? Is fortune or the ascendant in the moon's face, right?
Mhm.
Is she waxing? Is she the sect leader? Whatever it may be. So we've talked about these considerations before, but just a comment, treat that like a list and not like you must have it all.
Mhm.
But if the star of Saturn is with the moon, he will be a haruspex, a person fond of lawsuits, one causing damage, suffering from the wrath of a god, or a blasphemer against the god. Thought this was interesting because a haruspex is someone who like cuts open like animals and divines with the entrails, right? And Saturn with the moon, you still have this divinatory element happening here, right? It's not like Saturn prevents the moon from being a messenger of the gods, but it's in a Saturnian fashion with like gore and death.
Yeah.
So yeah, if Jupiter's with the moon, soothsayer, interpreter of oracles. If Mars is with the moon, but they're in their own places, face it, own places or faces. The text is a little ambiguous there. Especially by night, there's produced a general perjurer for the sake of gold. Sometimes too he is skilled because of the wrath of the sometimes he is killed because of the wrath of the queen.
Mm.
Yeah. So I feel like that's kind of straightforward, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, if Mars is with the moon, but they're dignified, right? Especially insect, there is produced a general, right? A
Mhm.
perjurer of the gods. So there's still some productivity here. It's not so damning. Did you want to continue from there?
Yeah, I guess I was also just gonna say, like, what we're kind of getting again is just like basically we're taking for granted like the moon's in the third, and whenever she's interacting with another planet there, it's just gonna add that influence into moon in the third kind of things. So if it's a good moon in the third, okay, that's like, power and advice from the gods and having some kind of authority. Like he says, he'll have money from sacred places and rule cities. That on its own is not necessarily a third house thing, but like when you have a really strong moon in the third, that's just denoting a lot of power. And that's something unique with 3 and 9 as the rejoicing places of the luminaries, is that, if you just have a strong luminary and it happens to be in the rejoicing house, like that already just gives it that eminent power that we get with strong luminaries. So it's almost like I feel like for the strong moon here, the house element here is just adding the like a subtext to what we feel with just strong moon and like someone who has power or visibility in society generally. And then, when it's out of sect, right? Like it's a day chart with moon Mars stuff going on in the third. Yeah, that's going to look more like, violent attacks from, while you're traveling, or maybe the death of a sibling, or getting banished and the wrath of the queen, right? It's like, you just have to read into the energy more to see what that looks like it's playing out as, with like sect, and the larger things considered in each context. And that's going to apply to all of this stuff. So, we'll read some of it, but like we said earlier, a lot of it's kind of straightforward. So yeah, I'll read the next paragraph. There's some interesting stuff here that I did highlight to talk about. So he said, if the lot of fortune is present with the star of Venus in her face, so her is a little ambiguous here. It could be referring to Venus because he just said Venus, or the moon because we're talking about the moon. So this is maybe not super clear here. Um, but he said, especially by night, and the moon ruling the lot is there with her in her own face. Um, and again, we could assume here he's talking about the moon being in her own face or her own decan. Um, The native will be great, rich, receive kindness from a woman, and spend some time in positions of authority, and also deal in spices. So, again, we're looking at, okay, what is just the words that we're picking out, like the moon, the lot of fortune, Venus, Decan rulership, and what words are coming out from
Insect,
Rhetorius.
right?
Hmm?
They're both by night.
Right. Yeah, and it's great, rich, kindness from woman, authority, right? And so it's not even like the fact that these are feminine um, planets necessarily does anything about indicating something about the wife or the mother. It's like, no, these are planets, and when they're aligning in their proper powers, that's just powerful. That's great. That's eminent. That it doesn't say anything, even about the nature, or gender, right? In a traditional context of what that is normally categorized as in ancient astrology. He's just talking about how that's really powerful, and in some cases could be about receiving the kindness or help of a woman. So maybe you have like moon Venus strong in the third house, and that could be about the way you get benefits, from female friends or female cousins, or from like a female teacher, you had. So yes, it could apply, in that way as well. um
Quick
yeah.
comment. I know
Hmm.
a woman who has the moon in the third in Cancer, besieged. And just for a little bit of like concrete evidence, while the moon is in Cancer, it is dignified, it's besieged by two squares. Saturn and Mars are opposite, and the moon is separating from one square, applying to another. So that's a challenging configuration. And she spent a lot of time when she was younger, homeless. Her mother was not able to take care of her, but she always, she told me this when we were talking about it. She always had an older woman who was there to help her. Like she
Mm.
said that she would be starving or alone and needing a place to sleep, and there would be a woman. And she said that she has like a special love for women and a special distrust for men, which is off topic.
Mm.
But yeah, because of that. And her aunt was the one who ended up getting her out of that situation. So, yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like
Yeah.
having an aunt that belongs in the third house, right? Extended family,
Mhm.
and women being the one to help. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for that. That's a really interesting example.
yeah, of course.
Um, so yeah, then he goes on. Now he brings in Mercury into the picture. And he says if Mercury happens to be there with the moon in one of his own faces, so he does use his instead of her, and we can assume he's talking about Mercury, even though we know Mercury is gender neutral. We can assume here that's what he's saying. So if Mercury's in his decan, with the moon in the third house and ruling the ascendant or the lot of fortune, this is going to be, he says, the native will foretell the future like a god, and he will take part in secret mysteries, and he will be a participant in celestial things and experienced in those receiving divine warnings and dreams like a prophet. So basically, yeah, I know. Very, very strong delineation here. Really powerful divinatory abilities, basically,
Mhm.
when we have Mercury. And again, there's a few things that need to happen here. Moon and Mercury in the third, Mercury in a decan, in his decan, any of them, and Mercury ruling a powerful helegical place like the ascendant or the lot of fortune. So Mercury needs to have the responsibility of making a strong foundation for the nativity, and then the power to do it by being in a decan, and then this being in this mystical third house with the moon also there.
Yeah, I really like that excerpt. I think it's a really cool one.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Um, the last thing in that paragraph, maybe the ruler of the ascendant being there will cause dwelling abroad. I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause you hear that. I mean, you hear being abroad or being away from the homeland in the
Mm-hmm.
context of the 12th house, the ninth house, the sixth house, and the third
Yeah.
house. But the language here is distinctly different, right? Like with the 12th house, men who are banished from their homes versus the third house where we have someone who is dwelling abroad, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So that's relevant with delineation because even though all of those things might signify living abroad, how it happens is very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just very quickly here, like, just did a quick search in Astro Gold just to see some moon in the third people. And actually, this is great because there I have a chart here of a woman who has the moon in the third house in Sagittarius, and it's
Mm.
making an exact contra antitia to Mercury. So moon is at 27 Sagittarius in the third house, and it has an exact antitia to Mercury at 2 Cancer in the ninth house. And she is basically the temple priestess for the OTO in Salem. And she is the priestess that hosts and participates in the Gnostic Mass every month there. And so, if you know anything about Thelema or Thelemites, this is like a super highly, it's all ceremonial magic and ritual magic. And so it just very amazing to see such a strong Moon Mercury 3-9 showing up yeah in her chart right there.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah. um
All right. So that next paragraph, the ruler of the third, while situated by phase, house, exaltation, aspected by an ethic, will make such person to be friends of great men. give
Mhm.
benefits from friends and brothers, especially if the
Mhm.
benefic chances to be in this house. But if it's a malefic, it's the opposite. So
Mhm.
here we have the introduction of friends and brothers with their association with the third, and he is relating that to the ruler of the third house. We're kind of stepping
Mhm.
away from the moon, rejoicing in the third here, and focusing just on the third. And what you can look at to evaluate that, right? Is it bona fide? Is it ruled by a benefic or a malefic? Is it well situated? Is it direct, station, retrograde, whatever it may be? So
Mhm.
check down that list.
Yeah.
Saturn and Mercury being in the third makes revelations from dreams and mysterious things. I really like that one, because there you go. It's that same kind of prophet, the archetype that you get from Mercury's presence in the third house, but it's shrouded in this Saturnian darkness. So
Mhm.
sometimes Saturn takes things away from Mercury, right? Like, I think that earlier Rhetorius said that it makes men like unable to speak, or deaf, maybe something related to that, the inability
Mhm.
to communicate. Um, but and here, of course, factor in dignity and whatever else may be important. But still, he's not really saying that. He's just saying that them together um, gives you revelations from dreams and mysterious things.
Mhm. Yeah. And
And
I like to the right after that again, it's kind of it's always just grouped weird stuff together. But then he says like lot of marriage in the third, the marriage will take place abroad or with a foreign woman.
mhm,
Um, and then just says something about Venus in the third and favors from woman and for the native, which right before he kind of calls back to that in the paragraph above. I don't know if we read it, but he said malefics in this house make dangers from friends and dangers on account of brothers or dangers abroad. And so again, we have this very basic idea where benefic in the third, and not necessarily moon in the third anymore, but like benefic in the third, help and good experiences in these places, malefic in the third, bad experiences in these places, right? So this is the very basic idea, yeah, with this.
um,
Also, Paula said, this is great. I have a third house, moon, sun, and Mercury in Leo. Wow. Well, so great that you're tuning in
wow,
to have us chat
that's
about
wonderful.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
really cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and I'll add too, because we didn't say it, but he gave a specific line. If the sun is with the moon following the new moon, he will be a priest in the third house. That was one thing we skipped. So I don't know if you have a waxing or waning moon, but either way, yeah, that's very powerful, I'd say. So that's really cool. And then Neha said hello, and SP said that's a beautiful story, Stella. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, I just wanted to catch us up with some of the live friends tuning in here.
Hello, hello, friends. Thank you for
Mhm.
joining us today.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So I love
So,
how we said we weren't going to read this entire thing word for word, and so far we have not skipped any of it.
well, I
Uh,
will say the next paragraph though is good, the rulers of the houses.
yeah,
And after that, we can definitely start to move around a bit because, yeah, I mean, he starts saying very similar things. And again, this just brings us back to who the heck compiled this? What are we reading? Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we can read the rulers of the houses.
yeah. I think that's a really important part, and
Mhm.
um, it reminds the idea that planets are responsible for houses and thus imbibe with those
Mhm.
houses and their outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So he says that the ruler of the sixth or the 12th, being in the third house, makes hypocrisies and betrayals by friends, damages from enemies. They make injury and sickness when the native is abroad. The ruler of
Mhm.
the third, being in the second or the sixth, makes assaults by bandits on the road. The
Mhm.
ruler of the fifth and the 11th, being in the third, makes good and profitable sojourns abroad and in friendships, right? So we have these dark houses, right? And those are sicknesses, dangers abroad, things like that. But then we get to the ruler of the fifth and the 11th, which you can't have something ruling both the fifth and the 11th, but you can have both rulers in the third house.
Mhm.
Um, so if
Mhm.
that's in the third house, It makes profitable sojourns abroad and friendships, right? So there you have good houses. In the third house, it brings good topics in. Then the ruler of the seventh being in the third makes foreign marriages. Notice the similarity there with the lot of marriage and how those are treated similarly when delineating
Yeah.
marriage.
Mhm.
Yeah, was there anything else in that paragraph you wanted to say?
Just if the two lights are found in different cadent houses, say that the parents are of another race. That's really interesting. Um, that basically, again, we know cadent places are foreign places. So if both of your luminaries are in different cadent houses, somehow this is emphasizing the nature of the parents to be, yeah, whoa, I'm having crazy thunder. I don't know. Did you hear that? What?
I
I'm
think
le-
with the sound blocker, the background
yeah, it might
noise.
be that, but I'm leaving my window open because we just have this beautiful soft thunder that's been like rumbling for 30 minutes. But that one just got loud. I didn't know if you heard it. Um, anyway, yeah, I thought that was interesting for people to consider that. Yeah, if you have like both luminaries cadent, it's just emphasizing again something extra foreign about the natives' relationship to their parents and their ancestry.
Nice. Um, all
Yeah,
right.
why
There
don't
was
we?
nothing. Oh, yes. The only other thing that I really wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
So following this section, it gets redundant. Cam already mentioned this, but what happens is he ends up kind of going into the house of God and
Mm.
ends up kind of using this distinctly ninth house language in reference to the third house.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of ambiguous there, what really happened, we aren't sure. But he pretty much repeats what was said in the earlier sections. So that could have been a mistaken interpolation at some point or something like that. Maybe it was just copied over because their delineations are so similar. We don't really know. Um, was there anything else you wanted to say about the third house?
I guess when he brings in the nodes on the bottom of page 64, he says, if the ascending node chances to be in the house of brothers, and Jupiter and Venus and the sun are there with the moon or aspecting her, he will be grieved over by a brother, or lose one, or will injure one. And this is just funny because we're back to the story of what is the effect of the nodes with the planets here. Because then he says if the descending node is there with Jupiter and Venus, it's the worst configuration for the parents. So in either node here, with benefic planets in this house, it's causing some kind of chaos and turmoil to the family or to the brothers. So we have a little bit of a strange situation. And later on, it looks like it gets a little more consistent for the other houses. I think this was the line that was the most confusing for me. But like then he said, if Saturn or Mars are there, the evil is weakened by them. But the father at least is injured, and that's with the South Node. So again, we have that idea that okay, maybe the father still has some injury, but the evil is lessened with the South Node being in the house, which makes sense. But that was it, pretty much.
All right. And then my closing note on the third house
Mhm.
is that Rhetorius seems to seriously give friendship and communal discussions to the third house. When
Mhm.
you read his chapter on the seventh house, it's definitely playing in with the idea of acquisition, right? The 11th place from fortune is the place of acquisition. He does mention friends, nowhere, but like one time. It's nowhere near as thorough and like there's nowhere near as much emphasis on your friends and how they treat you as there is in the third house.
Mhm.
So I think that's really interesting um, that the 11th is more about the succeedant part of the 10th, right? In Rhetorius's treatment than your communities and things like that get put on the 11th today.
Zeus is active. I don't know. You didn't hear it?
Oh,
Oh
bestie,
my
the
God.
noise blocker filters it out. Turn your noise filter off.
Um,
I don't think you can do that while you're in a meeting, though.
Yeah, I don't know. Audio settings. Zoom optimized audio, background noise suppression. I'll put it on low or high.
Oh
Oh,
my
original sound for musicians. I'm a musician now. Okay, well, we'll see if the thunder comes again.
God.
But yeah, you can see my lighting. The clouds it got so dark, um, just suddenly. Um, but I think I know why, because I think Scorpio's rising now. So there we go. All right. Anyway, should we get on to the fourth house?
I think we should.
Okay. Do you want to read it?
And
Oh,
we can hear the thunder.
yeah, that's some good thunder. That
Yeah,
wasn't even the loudest yet.
that is
Um,
good.
all right, we'll just let that be a comfortable background, and you can take us away.
Oh, okay. The fourth house. So I'll just read that first paragraph and then you can move on from that. The fourth house is called the under earth angle and the time of old age. It signifies the topic of parents, property, and hidden matters, and the house in which one is born, and foundations, and the things happening after death. In horary charts or elections, it signifies the action of the astrologer according to the aspect of the stars. For either Jupiter or Venus will bestow gain and praises, or Saturn and Mars, losses and condemnations on the astrologer. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah. I know that Saturn culminating has been kind of discussed as like one of the considerations before judgment for like a client who will damage your reputation, right? Or some kind of ill that will befall you on behalf of a client's doing. Yes, we can hear it. Um, but here it's kind of a little bit more geared towards the astrologer, right? Um, it signifies the actions of the astrologer according to the aspect of the stars. And so it's about what the astrologer receives rather than what the client does, right? Because does that make sense? Does that distinction make sense?
Um, well, why would it? What do you mean what the client does? Because I guess it's what the astrologer does, right? Because he's using,
Well,
I
I
think,
was saying when you compare like the 10th house and that consideration for judgment, or like Saturn in the 10th, like be wary because the client will cause you harm or like damage your reputation. Um,
mhm.
Comparing that with like the fourth house, where it's about what the astrologer receives and how that like axis situation works. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I feel like he's using, without saying it, like the derived houses from the seventh, because the seventh is the astrologer, in a horary question. And so normally, like, the considerations also are always to the seventh house. So if the seventh house is debilitated, then you might want to step away from that one. But here, it's like he says the action of the astrologer, like in my like derived house reading brain, that's like, yeah, 10th from 7th. So that's how I'm seeing this, which I've never read before. It could exist elsewhere, but I've never read that. So that was really interesting, actually. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah. Also, because I don't think he's really, maybe, maybe like one or two other times he's used in Hori or electional charts, like when we were talking about like us, like crooked signs and things like that. I don't even remember. Um, but yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Where was that actually?
The first paragraph?
No, when we talked about when he explicitly used the word Hori or elections.
I don't recall.
Hmm.
I think that maybe elections would have been discussed when he you just said this though, crooked signs or
Yeah.
like the ascensional rates. But I mean, this is a compendium of horoscopic astrology, really, not horary
What do you mean?
like
Horoscopic astrology.
book.
Do you mean natal astrology?
Yes, I mean natal astrology.
Okay. Only because I think people equate those in unjust ways because, like, when people say horoscopic astrology started in Hellenistic Egypt, I don't think that's true. Like, the Babylonians were calculating an ascendant for thousands of years, even if they weren't doing natal astrology, like getting an ascendant at birth. Um, this is just a whole separate tangent, but I just feel strongly that it's natal astrology is like a subset instead of the the thing of getting an ascendant.
Well, yeah. I mean, like they were doing mundane astrology for a long, long time
Mhm.
before they were doing like natal astrology.
Mhm. Anyway,
Yeah, besides the point. Um,
um,
did you want to pick back up with 67th second paragraph?
sure.
Can the audience hear me when that happens? Or does it cut me off when
Maybe
I'm
we
under
can
time?
ask.
Because I feel like it's probably interrupting.
I can go back. If someone wants to say if it's disturbing, then I'll turn this off. But yes, I can resume. So, yeah, and this is another thing that will come up a lot with all of the ways he interprets planets in the fourth house is something he said right at the beginning and what I'm about to read again, that it signifies old age. So, like, I'm just going to read this and then we'll abstract it because it's really simple, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So, a good old age and death will result from Venus or Jupiter being in this house. But Mars or Saturn chancing to be there give not only a miserable death to the native, but also injury and suffering. And they totally destroy the ancestral possessions. Um, Venus there makes bad marriages, but old age will be free from toil and trouble. So it's like, you have Venus at the bottom of the sky, in the under earth. Um, but later in life, things will be nice at least. Um, Even though supposedly this is going to, make challenging marriages. Now the
Well,
moon, or yeah,
I'm sorry.
no,
I
it's
was gonna
fine.
say, well, like, let's think about like Venus and like marriage and relationships, right? And like
Mhm.
what the fourth house exactly is. Like, while it's private, like it's hidden, it's
Mhm.
beneath, it's below, it's
Mhm.
behind, it's not raised up into the heavens and shown off to the world, right?
Mhm.
So that can just be something that's like really private, or maybe like a hidden marriage or some kind of um with the other significators of the fourth house, maybe it's an arranged marriage, right? Maybe that's something that's culturally standard for you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's also interesting because at least she would be squaring the first and seventh houses as well.
Hmm.
So there's like maybe just this extra tension in
Yeah.
relating to others
Hmm.
for whatever reason.
It's a good.
Um, Now, if we have moon malefic stuff going on, so moon in hard aspects to the malefics makes hardships in secret places or on account of some secret matters. It brings restrictions and imprisonment. These natives bury their wives and children. So basically, um, from hidden things, from secret places, you bring more restrictions and imprisonment and loss. So having moon malefic fourth house stuff, that combination again in our and hard aspects really. So like having angular malefics with the moon in the fourth, um yeah, that's going to bring on some challenges for the base of your life, or again bring like secret and hidden things, which sometimes I wonder like what that really means. Does that just mean things that like things just go poorly for the native and they don't understand why, or are they talking about like the native is becomes involved with like you know secret operations that bring on like negative things, like I don't know, like being in I don't know, like some like not a gang, but like something that's like supposed to be like exclusive, that's not revealed to everyone, that's bad, like a cult or
I totally I could very well see it being like a cult, a gang,
Mhm.
some kind of like background, like operation or something like that. But it could go either way, like I don't think he is caring to be super specific because astrology, like when you delineate, you can usually only be so specific.
Right.
Like, it's not like you can look at the moon and Saturn in the fourth and be like, actually,
Hmm.
we're caught for being in a gang rather than caught for something that you don't even know, like what happened or whatever. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Yeah. Um, was there more stuff you wanted to say in this paragraph?
um well, Tori Smith just responded. They said, I think earlier in life it was hidden things about the family. Um, I went to juvie earlier on, but now it seems I'm ending ancestral karma or separating myself from my roots. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's really, challenging, I imagine, to endure. Okay, they also just wrote, they added, I have Moon Mars conjunction. So lots of arguments, violence, separated from my mother earlier in life.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the fourth house is your family. It's both like the roots and like before you die and like the end of your life and like as you die. And so like what what's going to be inherently like grouped in with these topics are your parents and your kids, right? Your lineage. And
Mhm.
so like when this is afflicted, it causes a lot of challenges with your family and your upbringing. And those are things that are hard for people to like heal from and deal with. And it takes a lot of like grit and perseverance to get through that stuff.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, kudos to you guys because you are doing well. And, you know, I'm proud of you for being able to share it. Thank you.
yeah.
So, yeah, something that I did think was interesting. Oh, wait, just kidding. Not this one. Not this one. That line is nonsense. And Holden says so. But on 68, um, Saturn being there in sect, in a domicile, or in the exaltation of Jupiter. So Saturn in Sagittarius, Pisces, or Cancer.
Mhm.
Bizarre, bizarre. But shows finders of treasure and, especially when it is stationary, loss of the parental inheritance, but it will certainly give hidden things and it will destroy the children.
Mhm.
So this is really crazy. Like there's a promise here of treasure or finding some kind of hidden, like helpful thing, right? And Saturn has no dignity in any three places that are mentioned here, right? Um,
Mhm.
except for triplicity and Sag, but still, you wouldn't usually expect that to come from it. And he says that it doesn't come without any hardships, right? He says, in fact, you're going to experience these things too, but you're also going to have some kind of hidden benefit. That could be literally finding hidden treasure or having an anonymous donor for a surgery or having winning the fucking lottery,
Mhm.
maybe,
Yeah.
like it's some that, and you decide to keep it a secret, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this is very interesting to me. He brings up this exaltation of Jupiter several times with the fourth house, like in the last paragraph at the bottom of 67. He says, but if the moon's in a domicile of Mars, aspected by malefic, it's banishment and loss of paternal inheritance. If, in fact, it's not in the domicile or exaltation of Jupiter. So basically, he's just saying, if it's just ruled by Jupiter down there, That's going to alleviate the negative situation a lot. And yeah, it's like, the fourth house on its own is hidden matters, secret matters, hidden treasure. And so, yeah, when Jupiter is ruling that, um, it's increasing the opportunity to find it, I guess. And Saturn also, I think, can be like Saturn in the fourth. Um, and actually, let me find, where is this? Oh, yeah, this is the bone of 69. Saturn being there by day makes those who pile up their wealth and guard their gold. But by night, destruction of the parents and danger to the father and illness to the native and makes his youth ignoble. So like when we have a, insect or dignified Saturn in the fourth, it feels like there's roots of like what Saturn was for a long time, as like an agricultural god and, as like the ruler of the estate and the wealth of the family, So when he's positioned well, he can offer those things. But when he's out of sect, this is that turning into destruction to the family or of the property or the health of the family or native. Um, but then again, Jupiter ruling all of that will only help it out. And he says that also.
Jupiter like incorporates some kind of like treasure in here because again, like after that, the second paragraph on 68, Jupiter there being makes profit from forbidden activities or from inheritances or finding treasure, right?
Mhm.
There's another just discussion about Jupiter and treasure, right? So I think that's really fascinating.
Mhm.
I mean,
I
Jupiter does,
also like. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying Jupiter does rule wealth, but still.
Hmm. Yeah, I also just like you know, it can show gain in old age and the rising of good fortune and easy death. But later, later in life, you have that. Um, let's see what else. For Mercury and Venus in the fourth, this is kind of interesting because he says it injures the matter of brothers and children. It makes prudent persons but false accusations and charges, especially when aspected by Mars and put in signs other than its own. But it will also give female sorcerers, Mercury and Venus in the fourth house. And that's very interesting because I think Venus is the female indicator and Mercury is the sorcerer. But in the fourth house, I guess he's maybe also just bringing in this hidden element of the activities there that could, yeah, bring um, someone to discover the elements of the hidden world through magic.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and something that I really thought was interesting about this that here's Jupiter again, relation to the fourth. Like I think that he keeps emphasizing Jupiter here because Jupiter is inherently like offspring, procreation. Like there's this distinct archetype of Jupiter, which is like continuation of the bloodline.
mhm,
And Mercury, right? In a house or the exaltation of Jupiter, he becomes the father of others' children and he begets children by a cripple. So it's not really clear like what exactly he's talking about because like immediately before that he mentions Mars.
mhm,
But I think that this is tying back with Mercury because that's kind of like the theme of this paragraph. Because he's talked about Venus in more detail already, Mercury, and going in Chaldean order, that would just make sense, except the sun is not in the right place. But anyway, um, in a house or the exaltation of Jupiter, he becomes the father of others' children, and he begets children by a disabled person. So Mercury is exiled and has no dignity in Jupiter's signs, right? In Sag and Pisces, Mercury does not have strength. So that can be being the father of another person's child, right? Or having children with somebody who is disabled or having a disabled child, right? So that incorporates dignity into this discussion here well, right? It's Jupiter, so you're still getting it,
mhm.
but it's not, it's still an exiled planet.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. The ruler of this house in opposing the house, so in the 10th, or in 6, 8, and 12, they'll meet their end abroad. I'm wondering if has to do with either the fourth being like the significator of like death in a way. It's like the darkest, lowest place. So often death can show up. Um, yeah, or if it's just the dark houses showing up in the house of hidden things. But either way, it's interesting to just see mixing the fourth with the dark houses is dying abroad. Um, and there was one other interesting thing. Where is it? Oh, well, yeah, just the moon here. So the moon there means, he says, the mother is of lower birth. And if the ruler of the fourth house or the ruler of the moon's sign is that ruler is cadent, it makes her a slave or one who suffers a miserable death. And understand the same things also in the case of the father, judging from the sun. So yeah, I guess it's interesting because we see like that somehow the sun or moon in the fourth house generally, probably if it's weak, that's showing a tougher, situation for the parents. But then if the ruler is cadent, that's even worse. Um, so another interesting way to approach, yeah, judging the luminaries with the fourth house, I think.
Bestie, I'm sorry. Would you be able to put the sound blocker back on, please? I can hear the sirens going by and
Oh,
just a lot of background noise, or like a vacuum, maybe.
it's yeah, there's like a water thing. There weren't sirens though, so I don't know
I don't know what
what
that
that was.
is. Maybe it
Um,
was like the fan in your laptop or something.
should I repeat it, or
Oh,
I
were you?
was just talking about the Marys in the fourth house.
I thought you had finished your thought. I'm sorry. Can you hear
That
me?
yes,
Okay. I thought you had finished your thought. I'm sorry if
I
you weren't.
did. No, I just said should I repeat it because you said you
Oh,
brought up the whole microphone thing.
I mean, I don't know. I don't really care. It wasn't like you couldn't be heard like at all. It was just like a lot of background noise.
Yeah, it's fine. Let's just move on. Yeah. Well, the moon there being, oh wait, we're still in the, yeah. But the moon there being insect, he says this on page 71, makes the mother honored and increases the native standard of living. But out of sect, the mother's lowborn but wealthy, and they become involved in exchange. So basically, there's just, this contrast between, okay, what is he really saying with the luminary in the fourth? Because he's saying it's lowborn, but then when it's in sect, it's honored and increases the native standard of living. So yeah, there's just always mixed testimony, which again is like, duh, like okay, we get it, but it makes sense in a way. No, it makes sense.
Are you ready to move on to the fifth?
Yeah, there's just so many other things he says, but most of them are redundant, I guess. Um, one thing, the last thing I think is interesting is just that he says, so if Venus is there, those who become more fortunate in the passage of years, friends of magnets, charming persons, becoming in their manner of life in youth, lacking for nothing, but strongly emotional. Now, in a tropical or bicorporeal sign, so cardinal or mutable, widowhoods, damages, and fights over women. But in fixed signs, Venus, they'll be well thought of and benefited by women. Unless Venus is in Aquarius, opposed by the moon. So this denotes those without posterity, and persons who are sterile, so people who can't have children or have family, and those who are unhappily married and homosexuals. So basically, fixed Venus is much better in the fourth house, unless it's Aquarius Venus, in which case I'm assuming it's just because it's Saturn ruled. He's saying they're unhappy in marriage or whatever. Um, but yeah.
Something about that like fixed and cardinal thing, right? So like angular house is going to be the fastest moving house, right? Succeedent follows, cadent is going to be the slowest, right? A cardinal house, a cardinal sign also has this speed and intensity to it.
Mhm.
Whereas a fixed sign has a mutable is in the middle. Fixed is the most stable.
Mhm.
So he's almost kind of getting at the idea that when in this place of so much speed and intensity that comes with an angle,
Mhm.
you want something fixed and stabilizing when it comes to, especially when it comes to topics of romance. So it's
Mhm.
not like you are burning through spouses, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But something else really interesting about this is that this angle can float into different whole sign places, which definitely will tailor like what's happening here, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I know. This whole question, is he talking about the fourth quadrant house or the fourth whole sign house? We know he was at least at some point using Alcabitius house division. But my feeling is that he's generally talking about the whole sign houses in this trek through. Just because he doesn't talk about house cusps. Um, and there are other excerpts where he mentions house cusps. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean just like in general, like the IC and the fourth house, the IC has a lot of these same significators as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, really, it shouldn't matter, right? Like, fourth house is gonna bring fourth house symbolism, like you said, whether we're talking about the degree of the IC or the fourth whole sign. Yeah. But yeah, all right. Should we move along?
Yeah.
All right. So the fifth house, our last house for today. It's the fifth house from the ascendant and called good fortune and course. That was something I underlined because I've never heard
Same.
this description before. I'm really more curious to know what the Greek word is. Course, like as in like journey or like a pathway course, or does it mean is course like something that's rough, spelled differently? Is that COA?
Yeah. RS.
Okay. Yeah, course. I don't know. We'll see. And it is the house of Venus, for she rejoices there. And when therefore Jupiter or Venus chance to be there and are rulers of fortune or the ascendant, the native rules through the people, and especially Venus being in proper face. No, that doesn't mean decan. Proper face is the facing to the luminaries, which is like, say, we want to have Venus two signs west of the sun. So like the sun in Leo, the archetype is Venus in Libra. So like that's the proper face or the Almugia, which we talked about in an episode. Um,
Real
yeah.
quick, just to simmer on that. Face refers to decan, but
Mhm.
proper face typically refers to alignment near the sun relative to the dignity scheme.
Mhm.
Proper face when those are together.
Mm. Jared said, or is it like the course of a meal?
Ooh,
Yeah,
clever.
yeah. No, I mean, it's such an interesting word for this. Like, course of the meal absolutely makes sense. But yeah, like I don't know what other thoughts do you have about course?
Um, I need to look something up really quickly because I don't want to sound like an idiot.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know because like I just I'm like why would that word show up here and not like in any of the 10 other houses he talks about travel with? Like this is like children and pleasure and it's like course like more journeys like what? But
Yes. Yes. So I
what?
was kind of in my brain, I was like, course, like courting, like maybe there's some kind of similarity there.
Oh.
Um, by it means like to pursue, to hound, to run, to pass over in an archaic sense. They know that
The
by
court, the chase.
yes, exactly. And like that is directly related to romantic topics, right? Like
Okay, I really wish I
it's
saw the Greek
yeah, that's really fascinating.
word.
While you're
Um,
looking up the Greek, I'm going to continue reading. Is that okay?
okay.
Cool. We'll come back to this. Um, yeah. When Jupiter or Venus chance to be there and are rulers of the lot of fortune or the ascendant, the native rules through people. The native will have honors in the presence of all if it is not aspected by a malefic. Mars here makes a tyrant or a general. The ruler of the ascendant or the ruler of the lot of fortune there in their own face makes rulers of, in their own faces, make rulers of life and death. I think that's interesting, kind of weird. Make rulers of life and death. When I heard that, something that I thought of was like a doctor, because that could be a way that you refer to somebody who tries to deliver life and fend off death, but a doctor can also just kill you. So I feel like that might kind of fit that archetype. There's not a lot of people who rule life though. For rulers of death, you could have a mortician, a um, why can I not remember the word? But you get what I'm getting at. The
Sure.
ruler of life,
Yeah.
ambiguous.
Mm. Yeah. No look on the Greek. I'll have to circle back to this. Because if that is what it's saying, that's yeah, that's very interesting. Like the sexual pursuit of relationships, which makes sense. We know that's in the context of what he says later on.
So,
Um,
I mean, some other things that that could mean that are less conducive towards that idea too is just like the direction you go, right? Like a course. A course is somewhere that you go and you know where you're going, right? There's it's clearly lined out the way in front of you, but that's a little
Mhm.
less in sync.
Yeah. I just wish he left a footnote on that one because I feel like that's normally he does for things that are very unique or something. But anyway, um, yeah, the ruler of the ascendant and lot of fortune there in their own faces make rulers of life and death. You know, like you were just talking about that. Yeah, I think it's just powerful to see that the fifth house, it's a trine to the ascendant, which we can't underemphasize is uniquely like domineering, and even the sun here in its own face, friends of kings, but ruling sacred and divine things, right? And even Saturn there just on its own. Rich people, rulers of lands, founders of buildings, countries, and cities. He's not saying anything about sect or in a decan. Um, and again, that's strange because you'd think, well, wouldn't Saturn like negate the good things of the fifth house when he's there? And that's an interesting thing because that makes me think about what Valens said about the fifth and 11th houses, because Valens said they're just so beneficial that the malefics can't do harm in 5 and 11. Um, and even Mars there, makes a tyrant or a general. So it's like the initial descriptions he's giving about the planet in each house, they're all gifts. They're all good things, pretty much. Um, Now, what else here as we move along?
Oh, I did want to talk about one thing. Um,
Mhm,
Mercury makes secretaries of wide experience, advancing through words, and entrusted with money, especially if
mhm,
it is not under the sunbeams and is in proper face, not beholding Mars or Saturn. I thought that was really interesting because Bonatti gives the third triplicity ruler of the fifth house to emissaries. And
mhm,
here we see clearly like kind of why we might incorporate the idea of somebody delivering something for you, spreading something for you, bringing something to you, um,
mhm.
and how that relates to this broader notion of a gift,
Yeah,
a
yeah, that's
deliverance.
a
Like
yeah.
a child is a deliverance, a gift is a deliverance.
Mhm. Um, where else does he say something about messengers? Um, I can't find it. But yeah, I mean that's still on its own is a really interesting example for an earlier source that talks about messengers with the fifth house. Um, it almost makes me think about like the followers of your 11th house, like people who are friends or people who want to be around you or listen to. It's like the fifth house is that more physical, where it's like people that will serve your command. It's like, well, if there's something commanding there, it's like it creates something to follow what you write, whether that's literally like having children who of course have to listen to you because you're mommy and daddy, but like someone who has command in word or power. Like he talks about here with generals and tyrants and rich peoples who rule lands with Saturn, or the friends of kings and who rule sacred and divine things with the sun there, right? So even the moon here, well situated, good fortune. And when she's ruling fortune or the ascendant in proper face and increasing her motion, but with benefics being with her, give good things. Malefics will shatter them. So that's interesting that the moon actually makes more variability here in terms of, it's like, okay, moon in the fifth, it's kind of like you have like an empty test tube. It's like, this could get filled up with anything and go either way. It's like we throw some benefics in, that's good, but the malefics will shatter whatever energy the moon is kind of throwing around up in the fifth house.
And you know what? Something really important about the word shatter is that
Mhm.
something has to be built for it to be broken, right? It's this idea, not that it will never come to you, but that
Yeah,
it will be taken away.
right. It could be like
So,
the death of children. Mhm.
exactly. Um, yeah, yeah.
Which, speaking of children, we have a few interesting paragraphs here coming up. So ruler of 12th in the 5th or the 8th, or the ruler of the 5th in the 12th, stepfather, foster father of other people's children. So basically 5 with 8 and 12, he's saying it's not necessarily death of children yet, but he's saying you're dealing with other people's kids.
That was so ominous.
What?
You're like, it's not exactly like we're dealing with death of children yet.
Well, well, we're not that far away from that section. I was adding dramatic flair. Okay.
Okay.
I have to keep people interested.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's other people's kids. And he also said if the ruler of the 5th or the ruler of the lot of children is in the 8th. So this is different though, because now we're looking at if the ruler of the 5th house is literally in the place of death, or if the ruler of the lot of children is in the place of death, it makes childless persons or those burying children. If the ruler of marriage or the lot of marriage is in the 5th, a happily married man and one who takes to wife a widow having a son. So that's interesting. It's like when you have, and it's also interesting, he says the ruler of marriage, so that could be the 7th house lord, I'm assuming, or maybe the ruler of Venus, because then he says the lot of marriage on its own.
Right.
But if any of those things are in the 5th, it's like, yeah, you'll be happily married, but probably to a widow where there's already a son involved if you don't have the son in the first marriage. Sorry, I'm smiling because of what Jared wrote. Jared said, me glued to my seat, waiting for the death of children. Thank you, Jared. Thank you for entertaining
Right.
my wrath of astrological wisdom. Okay. All right. Let's come back. Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
guess.
I will also say that, like, firsthand, I know of somebody with the ruler of the 5th applying to square the out of sect malefic exiled in the 8th who did lose a child. So, aspects play a role here as well, not just like house placement too, but like it's the ruler of the 5th going to square a planet in the 8th that's already acting maliciously, right? It doesn't have the resources to act in a more beneficial or constructive way. So,
Mhm.
yeah, just throwing that out there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You want to talk about the node stuff?
Yeah. If the ascending node is there with Jupiter, Venus, or Mercury, or they are aspecting the house, he will be blessed with children and he will have notable children. But if Mars or Saturn behold the house, it will destroy the first children, or one of them will die violently. If the sun chances to be there or is in aspect, he will be delivered from these evils, but his children will be injured. So that's certainly something. I mean, if the sun happened, so if Mars or Saturn even aspect the fifth house, it can take away one of the children, violently or unfortunately. Like if there's even an aspect there.
Are
Um,
we assuming the North Node is in the fifth, though? Or it's
that's not really clear. Because he says if the ascending node is there with Jupiter, Venus, or Mercury, or they are aspecting the house, he will be blessed with children and will have notable children. But if Mars or Saturn behold the house, it will
Mhm.
destroy the first children, or one of them will die violently. I guess that could be saying if Mars or Saturn beholds the house in the same way that Jupiter, Venus, or Mercury are beholding,
Mm.
rather than
I feel like it's might be that only because that's a lot to just say either of those two aspect the house and the kids die. Um,
I know. Well, but
but
also keep
also
in mind, like, well, but what he's saying is that Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury are only aspecting, I think. No?
well, I just feel like he is because one, it's there's so many charts where they're gonna aspect the fifth house. But two, because that's all grouped in a paragraph, and then the next paragraph is if the descending node is there.
Oh, yeah,
Um, and then he does it in reverse where then he introduces the malefics and then the benefics. So
you're right.
I yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting though, either way, because we're getting North Node, benefic, good kids, North Node, malefic, destroying children, North
South
Node.
node, South node, malefic, destroys children.
Mhm.
South node, benefic, his son will not return from a trip abroad.
Yeah. Well, we were saying before we went on, we're gonna work on really getting to the bottom of what the nodes are doing according to Rhetorius and get back to you guys on this. We're gonna like make a table or something to figure this out and just get a more consistent view from all the
Yeah.
different possibilities here.
Because I mean, well, when in our last episode, it seemed he was pretty consistent. There was just a little bit of ambiguity, but it seemed
Mhm,
like generally he was saying that Rahu North Node amplifies benefics
mhm,
and um amplifies malefics.
mhm.
P2 decreases benefics and malefics.
Yeah.
But that's not been super consistent here.
Mhm.
I mean, it kind of is here. Like Jupiter, Venus are an aspect. The sun will not return from a trip abroad. The sun's might be alive, might not be, but you just like don't know.
Mm. Yeah.
Anywho.
Um, in the next pages though, he always does this. We go through all seven and then like the nodes and the house rulers and then the planets again, and sometimes with some more detail. And now when he's going through again, Mars by night in the fifth is really good. Um, that's like a really good spot for Mars. And other author like Valens talks about Mars in the night in a night chart in the fifth. Um, he says possessions, good things, renowned, they rule their acquaintances. Now, if the moon is there, it makes like dynasts and terrible in the army. So basically major rulers. Terrible in the army, hard to say if he's saying like they're just terrible fighters, like they're ruthless, or if he means bad leaders that have like a bad, weak army. Um, but if it's Venus instead of the moon, so Mars, Venus, an aspect, yeah, fortunate, careful in their actions, and charming. But by day, foreign travel is hurtful and very dangerous. So Mars again, in a night chart, he's acting a lot more auspiciously, as we would expect.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting how travel is working its way into this discussion here as well,
Mm,
because similarly to the ninth, the fifth house is trine the ascendant. While it's in
mhm,
the fifth, it still has that relationship to the ascendant that it shares with
mhm.
the ninth. So
Yeah.
that could very well factor into this here.
Mhm. Of course.
Yeah.
We'll see what it means. Sun is there on its own, moderate in fortune, childless, and unfortunate in children. So Sun in the fifth is not generally great for children, according to him.
Because the
Which
sun is
is
so hot and dry, right?
mm,
Like for a child, you need that like moisture and that warmth, but the sun
yeah,
isn't just warm, like it's hot and drying.
mhm,
So
yeah. Because Moon there by night is most gracious, makes leaders fortunate, illustrious, presidents, good things from their parents. But if she's not aspected by Saturn or Mars. But by day, the moon in the fifth is foreign travel, estrangements of parents, orphanhood, and with the passage of time, becoming fortunate. So yeah, again, night chart, strong moon in the fifth, just great things altogether.
I just remembered something that I should have mentioned earlier.
Boy.
Um, I will say I was in a Twitter space sometime
Mm,
last year, and there was this guy who came in, and and he was kind of a skeptic, but he was like really interested in like learning about like what real astrology was. Like he was like, I don't believe in like pop horoscopes or whatever, but like what actually is this? Very open-minded guy. Spent his whole life in the military, was in Vietnam. He had the moon and Mars in Scorpio in the fifth house.
mm,
And his son, so when shortly after his son was born, his wife passed away, and his son has had like numerous behavioral issues and
mm,
has gotten violent with his father like multiple times, doesn't
oh,
really take care of himself well. And I don't know, I just think that's interesting, like another real world example, right? Um,
mm.
of how that happened. And I can't believe I didn't mention that while we were talking about the moon and Mars in the fifth. But yeah, that was really memorable.
Yeah, that's a really powerful example.
Anywho,
Um,
um, I
yeah, I
really
mean,
like Venus there. Venus there, Venus in the fifth makes good prize fighters, victors in rich
oh,
contests, masterful, those having luck in everything, prophesying the future, ruling their acquaintances, subsidized by women or advanced by amorous endeavors, and acquiring property with the passage of the years. One
mm,
thing that I really like about this paragraph is that it really emphasizes the gamely and like winning element of the fifth house, right? Like prize fighters, victories in rich contests, right? Good luck in everything. Those are distinct fifth house significators. And I was interested to see that he doesn't mention kids at all. He does not mention kids and Venus and that relationship
mm,
with the fifth house, like at all.
mm,
And so he's like, forget them kids. Like Venus isn't here to be a mom. Like she's here to have a good time and win some
mm.
games.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Um, well, yeah, I feel like that's pretty much it. Um, do you have any other closing ideas or thoughts or feelings?
Yeah, just to summarize
Mhm,
his point on Mercury, when it's morning star, those who pile up gold, finders of good things, managers of other people's property. That last one, again, kind of reiterating this idea of an emissary or someone who is responsible for something on your behalf,
mm,
um, which is also interesting because kids are responsible for everything that you have after you die. So
mm,
that's also parallel here. Um,
mm,
and then when Evening Star, he's not a custodian or guardian of money, but one who squanders money deposited in secret. So I like one who squanders money deposited in secret. That could be like you try to deposit money in secret and that squanders it, or be like the IRS kind of a thing, being
Mm,
like, I saw you trying to deposit that money in secret and I'm gonna squander your ass. I think it's the latter. I think it's kind of like a
yeah,
snitch in that
yeah,
sense. And it makes professional men teachers or geometers. So I just thought that was interesting. Um, yeah, and relevant. And teachers and geometers, like you're passing something along to another
mm,
person. You know, there's this very distinct like continuation of something from person to person that comes up with the fifth house, whether it be your child, your emissary, or whatever it may be, or
mm,
your students.
mm, yeah,
Alrighty. So
yeah,
thank y'all for tuning in today. This was a fun little episode.
yeah,
I'll say little, we've probably been on here for an hour and a half.
yeah. Jared said, "Forget them kids. Venus isn't here to be a mom."
Exactly. Venus doesn't
Yeah.
like responsibilities.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning
Um,
in. That was the lower houses of the sky. And yeah, I hope you guys tune in for 6, 7, 8 next time. And
yes,
let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it.
please like
Tag
and
along.
subscribe, besties. We're begging you. No, just kidding. If you don't like us, you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But
You can leave
we
if you don't
don't
like us.
want
What are
you,
you doing here?
actually. Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, let us know if you have questions, concerns, requests for the future episodes.
mhm,
Next episode is going to be 6, 7, and 8. So,
mhm,
if you have a question about the sixth house, seventh house, or eighth house, let us know in
mhm.
advance. We'll see what we can do to answer it.
Yeah, and also if you have ideas for future episodes, season 2 is slowly winding itself down. We have 2 more episodes on the houses, and I think we're planning maybe 2 or 3 more after that.
Yeah.
And then it will be a new start for the Mercuranians. So
Season 2
the
is
sky's the
marinating
limit.
in the fridge overnight.
What'd you say?
And season 2 is marinating in the fridge overnight. But
Mm,
it will be here before you know it.
or season 3?
Oh my God, season 3. I meant, you're right. You're right.
That's
Please.
crazy though.
Yeah, I know.
But anyway, love y'all. Thanks for sticking around. There's still 9 people listening in right now. So
Wow. Thank you
yeah,
guys.
big hearts. And
Yes.
we'll see y'all soon.
Mercuranians out. Thank
Peace.
you.